snow, silence, and a man with a price on his head, sleeping under a tree while the world hunts him. If he lights a fire, soldiers see the smoke. If he doesn't, the cold kills him before morning. So how did medieval outlaws survive freezing winters in forests without being seen, without supplies, and without mercy? Stay with me, because what kept them alive wasn't luck. It was a system, brutal, clever, and almost forgotten. Imagine it's the dead of winter in 12th century England. Snow swallows the roads. Rivers turn to glass. The forest looks beautiful from far away. Up close, it's a slow execution. Now picture a hunted man like the legends whisper about Robin Hood, but strip away the romance, no green tights, no cheerful songs, just hunger, just frostbite, just fear. The first secret? They never slept where you think they did, not in open clearings, not in caves that trap cold air. They studied the wind. Cold air sinks, so they chose higher ground, under thick evergreen canopies that blocked snow and broke the wind. They built low shelters, barely taller than their bodies, from branches and packed leaves. Small space, less heat to lose. But here's the twist. Most nights, they didn't even use fire. Sounds impossible, right? Fire means warmth. But fire also means smoke, and smoke means soldiers. In forests controlled by lords loyal to the crown, patrols moved even in winter, especially in winter, because they knew something most people don't. Cold drives fugitives into desperate mistakes. So instead of roaring fires, outlaws mastered something quieter: body heat. They slept close, back to back, cloaks layered with moss and dry grass stuffed inside like primitive insulation. Wool if they had it, stolen, traded, or taken from the dead. And here's something chilling, literally. They sometimes buried hot stones under their bedding, stones heated quickly at dusk, just before dark, then carried carefully and wrapped in cloth. No flame through the night, just trapped heat. But warmth was only half the battle. What about food? Snow covers tracks, but it also hides traps. Outlaws were hunters long before they were criminals. They set snares for rabbits and pheasants. Silent traps, no chase, no noise. But in deep winter, animals vanish. So what then? This is where it gets uncomfortable. They ate bark. Yes, bark. The inner layer of certain trees could be scraped, dried, and ground into a bitter flour, mixed with crushed acorns, leached in running water to remove toxins. It became rough bread. Not tasty, but it kept you alive. And when rivers froze, they didn't fish with lines. They broke ice quietly and used woven basket traps placed under the surface, anchored where water still moved. Checked them at dawn. Fast, silent, gone before the mist lifts. Still think it sounds manageable? Let's talk about clothing. Medieval winters during the so-called medieval warm period were milder than later centuries, but don't be fooled. Nights could still kill. Outlaws layered linen under wool, leather on top to block wind, grease rubbed into boots to repel moisture. If your feet freeze, you're done. Frostbite spreads. You can't run. And running was life, because here's the truth. Winter was hunting season, not for deer, but for men. Sheriffs tightened control. Rewards increased. Villagers, starving themselves, might betray you for a sack of grain. So how did outlaws avoid betrayal? They built networks. Secret signals carved into trees. 3 slashes meant danger. A broken twig tied in a knot meant safe path ahead. They moved constantly, never more than a few nights in one camp, even in snowstorms. Especially in snowstorms. Why? Because storms erase tracks. Imagine marching through freezing wind on purpose. Because you know by morning no one can follow you. Brutal, smart, necessary. But here's a question. Where did they learn all this? Many outlaws were former soldiers, veterans of border wars. Men who had slept in mud during campaigns in places like Scotland. They knew fieldcraft. Others were dispossessed peasants who grew up working the land. Forest knowledge wasn't optional, it was survival. And sometimes monasteries played a hidden role, not openly, never publicly, never publicly, never publicly, but isolated abbeys near forests occasionally, lost extra bread or allowed certain travelers to pass through barns at night, risky compassion in a harsh world. Now imagine the psychological weight. Long nights, wolves howling, the constant crack of branches that might be deer or armed men. Sleep comes in fragments. One man always awake. Rotating watch shifts, weapons within arm's reach. A longbow strung but kept dry under oilcloth. Arrows fletched with care, because replacing them in winter was hard. Every feather mattered. And then there's illness. Winter colds could turn deadly. No antibiotics. No doctors in the woods. So they relied on herbal knowledge. Yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, pine needle infusions for vitamin C to fight scurvy-like weakness. Knowledge passed quietly through generations. Knowledge you don't find in heroic ballads. But here's the part that changes everything. The forest wasn't just a hiding place. In medieval law, certain forests were royal forests, controlled by strict rules. Ironically, that made them both dangerous and protective. Dangerous because poaching was punishable, protective because common folk avoided deep entry, fearing heavy fines. So the deepest zones became invisible corridors. Outlaws mapped them mentally. Streams, ridgelines, hollow trees large enough to store dried meat. Yes, they created hidden caches, food wrapped in waxed cloth, hung high in trees to keep animals. If captured, they might reveal nothing, because even if one cache was found, others remained. Compartmentalized survival, almost modern in its strategy. But what about the worst nights? Blizzards. When wind cuts through wool and even stones lose heat, this is where they used something unexpected. Earth. They dug shallow pits, lined them with branches, crawled inside, and covered the top with more brush and snow. Snow insulates. Inside, temperatures could remain just below freezing instead of far below. Counterintuitive, right? Hiding under snow to escape the cold. And during daylight, they moved like shadows, following animal paths instead of human roads, crossing streams deliberately to break scent trails. Yes, even from tracking dogs. They understood that water confuses pursuit. Now let's confront the myth. Were all outlaws noble rebels? No. Some were desperate thieves, some violent. Winter didn't purify them, it tested them. Alliances broke under hunger, trust thin like ice, a single selfish act. Stealing extra rations could fracture a band, and fracture meant death, because alone in winter forest, survival odds dropped fast, so leadership mattered. The most successful bands had strict rules. Share food evenly, no unnecessary fire, no loud arguments, rotate guard, break rules, face exile. And exile in January meant a quiet grave beneath snow. Still wondering how they endured month after month, they adapted rhythm to season. In autumn, they worked hardest, drying meat, collecting nuts, repairing cloaks. Winter was maintenance mode, minimal risk, maximum concealment. Wait out the season, because they knew something hopeful. Winter ends, and here's the emotional twist. Some didn't want it to. Winter meant fewer travelers, fewer patrols venturing deep. Spring brought movement, trade, soldiers, opportunity, but also exposure. So survival wasn't just about resisting cold. It was about timing the world outside. Imagine surviving 3 brutal months only to be captured in April because you grew careless when the sun returned. That happened, often, but legends rarely mention that part. That happened. Speaking of legends, Stories of men like Robin Hood survive because they symbolize resistance. Yet the real victory wasn't robbing a convoy. It was waking up in February with all your fingers still attached. It was keeping morale when hope felt thinner than your cloak. It was knowing the forest so intimately that it became an ally, not an enemy. And here's the powerful reveal. Medieval outlaws survived freezing winters not by fighting nature, but by becoming part of it. They shrank their presence, lowered their noise, matched the rhythm of wind and snow. They treated warmth as treasure, silence as weapon, patience as shield. In a world without central heating, without supermarkets, without mercy, survival was a craft, a discipline, a quiet rebellion against both crown and climate. So next time you picture a medieval outlaw laughing around a big campfire, remember this image instead. A small, nearly invisible shelter under pine branches, hot stones cooling slowly beneath a bed of moss, 3 men breathing in sync, one eye always open, snow falling softly above them, unseen, unheard, but alive. And that was the real legend. The snow is deeper now. The easy tricks are gone. The forest has turned from shelter into a silent judge. And here's the question. No one asks. What happens after week 6? After the last dried meat is gone? After your boots are cracking? After your fingers stop feeling pain because they've gone numb? This is the part of the story most legends skip. Because surviving one freezing night is skill, surviving an entire winter as a hunted outlaw in medieval England was endurance beyond imagination. By midwinter, hunger became the real enemy, not the sheriff, not the soldiers. Hunger. It changes men, makes them reckless, makes them loud, and loud men die fast in the forest. So outlaw bands created a brutal rule: ration first, complain never. Each man received equal shares, even the leader, especially the leader, because the moment one man eats more, trust cracks. And once trust cracks in freezing woods, survival collapses. But here's the twist. Some outlaws didn't just hunt animals. They hunted opportunity. Winter roads were dangerous. Ice made carts slow. Merchants avoided travel. But when they moved heavy. Fur, salt, grain, and fewer guards, because lords believed no sane criminal would ambush in a snowstorm. That belief kept outlaws alive. They attacked during blizzards, faces wrapped in cloth, footprints erased within hours, gone before sunrise. Risky? Yes. Necessary? Sometimes. But what if there were no caravans? What if patrols increased? This is where forced politics came in. Not every villager hated outlaws. Some feared them. Some admired them. Some needed them. In certain regions near Sherwood Forest, woodland communities understood something simple. The forest feeds those who respect it. Outlaws traded protection for bread. A warning about tax collectors in exchange for smoked fish, quiet alliances. No written contracts, just survival math. And then came the deepest cold. Rivers froze solid. Animal tracks disappeared. Even birds migrated. The forest felt empty. That emptiness was dangerous, because when food disappears, men consider betrayal. So leaders did something unexpected. They told stories, not heroic fantasies, real memories. Campaigns fought in border wars near Wales. Brothers lost, sieges endured. Why? Because shared hardship builds loyalty, and loyalty keeps men from turning on each other when bellies ache. But here's another reality. Disease didn't wait for warmth. Frost. Cracked skin became infected. A small cut from splitting wood could swell, redden, kill. Without physicians, they relied on forest remedies. Garlic crushed into wounds, honey packed into gashes to slow infection. Crude, sometimes effective. And if someone grew too weak to move, This is the question that chills the spine. Did they carry him or leave him? Legends won't answer that. History suggests harsh truth. Mobility meant life. A band slowed by one-man risked all. Some were left in hidden shelters with food and hope of return. Some were not. Winter forced decisions no ballad ever sings. Now imagine a moonless night, snow reflecting faint starlight, a distant horn echoing. Patrol, closer than expected. Fires forbidden. So how did they avoid freezing while hiding motionless for hours? They trained themselves to control breath. Slow, shallow, cloaks pulled tight, knees to chest, heat conserved, panic suppressed, because panic burns energy. Energy equals warmth. Lose that, you lose everything. And here's something rarely discussed. Women were part of these outlaw networks too, not always in the trees with bows, but as messengers, suppliers, watchers in villages. A washerwoman might notice soldiers asking questions. A baker might accidentally overcount loaves. Survival wasn't just muscle, it was information. And information traveled quietly through markets and monasteries. Some abbeys near forest edges in medieval France recorded complaints about woodland thieves receiving suspicious charity. Proof that sympathy sometimes crossed legal lines. But sympathy alone didn't stop frostbite. So let's talk about movement. Outlaws mastered something modern survivalists still teach. Never sweat in winter. Sweat freezing, sweat kills. So they moved slow, deliberate. Layers open while walking, closed while resting. Small details, life-saving results. Boots stuffed at night with dry grass to absorb moisture. If boots froze solid, they thawed them under cloaks before wearing. Never near open flame that stiffened leather. These micro skills separated the living from the dead. Still think survival was romantic. Picture this, it's February. Supplies almost gone. Morale thin. A scout returns with news. Bounty increased. The sheriff has doubled the reward. Suddenly, every hungry villager becomes a threat. Trust shrinks. Camps move deeper, and deeper means harsher terrain. Steeper ridges, thicker edges, thicker ridges, thicker undergrowth. Harder hunting, yet harder to track. This constant trade-off defined winter strategy. Safety versus food. Warmth versus invisibility. Community versus secrecy. And then something shifts. Late winter sunlight lingers a little longer. Snow softens midday. Streams whisper beneath ice. Hope creeps back. But hope is dangerous. Because melting snow reveals something terrifying. Tracks from weeks ago. Paths worn into forest floor. Signs of hidden shelters. Evidence. So before thaw fully arrives, outlaws dismantle everything. Shelters collapsed. Ash scattered. Caches emptied or relocated. They erase themselves. Not just to avoid capture, but to protect future winters. Because here's the powerful truth. Surviving one winter meant planning for the next. This wasn't temporary hiding. For many, it was a way of life. Years in woodland shadow. Children born into secrecy. Skills passed quietly from father to son, from mentor to recruit. How to read when, D. How to find dry wood under snow. How to disappear when dogs bark in the distance. And here's the final twist of this chapter. Winter didn't just test their bodies. It shaped their identity. The cold forged discipline. The silence taught patience. The constant threat sharpened awareness. By spring, those who survived weren't the same men who entered the forest in autumn. They were leaner, harder, more cautious, and strangely, more connected to the land than the nobles who claimed to own it. So when you hear stories of medieval outlaws laughing beneath green leaves, remember what came before that laughter. Months of frozen breath, months of empty stomachs, months of sleeping inches from death, while snow buried the world above them. They survived not because they were fearless, but because they respected the cold. They listened to it, adapted to it, became small enough to slip through it. And as the last ice cracked and the forest awakened, those who stepped back into the light carried a secret few understood. The real battle was never against the sheriff. It was against winter itself, and they had won, quietly, invisibly, one frozen night at a time.